So let's swoosh back from the past to the future, and some things are getting born today on this stage. So I'd like to introduce to you David Ricordan, who you will know is one of the key drivers behind OpenID, and somebody who is absolutely dedicated to making sure that users can own their own identity and their own data. David.
Good morning. So this morning I'm going to talk about something which I've been thinking about a lot the past few months, the past few years, along with a lot of other people. And so this very much is not my presentation, but this is a presentation that's been worked on by a community over the past few months. So we've been talking a lot about open source, and there's lots and lots of open source. I mean, far more open source than I can even imagine. Look at everyone that's here. Look at how long this conference has been going on and how successful it is. Hundreds of Linux distributions. SourceForge has alone nearly 200,000 different open source projects. Open source is very, very successful. But I want to talk a little bit about what I've been seeing as a bit of an evolution of open source and how the web starts to come into it. So I mean, I think everyone's fairly familiar with the browser wars and what was going on there. Originally, Internet Explorer versus Netscape sort of evolving there as Mozilla came about, or Firefox came about in the past few years. Things like the What Working Group trying to move HTML forward. Projects like Gears, which have evolved from just Google to a community of people working on how can we make the web better and support things like offline. And really what I think this was doing was starting to popularize the term the open web and shifting the conversation a little bit from just open source to some of the data behind it. And this is something that Tim O'Reilly has spoken about the past few years. As more services move into the cloud, it's not just the source code behind things which matter, but the data as well. So this isn't a new meme. I mean, I have my Mozilla, I support the open web wristband on, and a lot of the same companies that you see supporting open source are supporting the open web at the same time. It's not something that's necessarily new, but it's sort of one of those, I think, evolutions between open source to now with more and more services in the cloud. And I think we have a pretty good understanding of what it means to create open APIs. I think we know how to do that. I think it's now evolving into this conversation of proprietary standards versus open specifications, and how the open web really needs the ability to have open data to work. And to have that happen, we need things like interoperability. We need simplicity of these specifications. You can't go and have a specification which is 600 pages long and expect everyone to implement it. And I think we also need to think about the evolution of the definition of the web. Very much the web has been focused on things which move over HTTP. XMPP is something which is becoming more and more relevant to the web. We're getting to the point where we can't just pull for data all the time. But XMPP is being worked into websites, into popular sites, Web 2.0 sites like Twitter, to go and help with scaling as they need to push out notifications. And the web needs to be accessible everywhere. 30,000 feet above in a tin can, you have access to Google Maps. You're able to see where your plane is over the country as you fly around. You have things like the iPhone with maps, with the locate me button. The number of different APIs and technologies which that needs to take advantage of to work to give you the little pulsating blue circle around your location is pretty amazing at this point. And the web really has to be accessible by everyone. I mean, we've seen the value of network effects, we've seen the value of collective intelligence. The web can't be something which is siloed off into just one area. And I think something really happened last year around this. I mean, we're getting to the point where we now have an understanding of what it means to have services in the cloud. The web as a platform is something that's coming around as a term more and more, and something which is becoming understood. I think we all understand the value of openness. Let's not repeat what happened on the desktop with the web when we have the opportunity to change that. Things like view source really matter. I know I learned web programming by being able to go and look at the code that people were using before me. And I think last year, in the past few years, we've really seen this argument validated by venture capitalists who are now investing in and caring about more than just locking. They're actually looking at the companies that they're investing in and asking them how they're going to work with other companies. And you've seen this with things like social applications as well, where you have people building services which aren't trying to compete with each other, but rather look at how they can build on top of each other and create combined value. And I think that's really important. Obviously, there are a lot of companies and a lot of technologies doing this, and I want to highlight a few of them. Things like Google with Gears, Mozilla Firefox, microformats, things like ECMAScript 4 and the What Working Group. But today I want to focus on sort of three which I have more involvement in, and which I know some more of the pains that they've gone through and an understanding. So OpenID, OAuth, and OpenSocial. These are three specifications, open specifications, which have been developed by communities, much like some of the other ones that I was talking about. And they all have different backgrounds, but they're getting to the point where they have widespread adoption. And they're all quite similar. They have very diverse communities, ranging from individuals to companies, sometimes some of the largest companies on the web, being involved in creating these things and getting them out there. They have great open source implementations in a lot of different languages. These communities want to make sure that everything they create is freely implementable by anyone around the world. They're doing things like going and creating non-assertion agreements for any patents that they may or may not hold over these specifications to make sure that people are comfortable implementing them. And it's really an increasing rate of adoption. I mean, OpenID was created about 3 years ago. It's gone to the point where it's supported in many places around the web. OAuth, 2 years later, took that down to 9 months from when that community started working to Google shipping it in production. And all this work, or not all of it, but a lot of it is occurring outside of the formal standards bodies. And I don't think that's necessarily something that we can all change today, but I think it's something that's worth acknowledging. That there are some things that these communities are doing, such as sort of very much, I think some of the open source philosophies of coming together, working on a mailing list, and not necessarily explicitly saying, this is exactly what we're going to do down to the detail that all of our lawyers can agree what they want to give away and what they don't want to agree before we write any lines of a specification or any lines of source code. But they also share problems. So there's necessarily no clear licensing for these specifications. Each one's choosing different copyright licenses. Each one's choosing their own way to deal with intellectual property when it comes to patents to try to make these specifications free. And there's really no overarching community across these. There's no social contract in terms of saying, this is how you play well on the open web. But I think open source solved a lot of this. I mean, you have the formal standards bodies like the W3C and IETF and OASIS and ISO and all of these organizations which are doing great work at creating standards which can go and be implemented. And then you have groups like the Open Source Initiative, which is going and defining the term open source and going and validating open source licenses so that companies and individuals can understand what it means to download a piece of source code which says it's BSD or says it's Apache or says it's GPL, and not have to go and have their lawyers read over pages of licensing every single time they download a new technology. You have the Creative Commons making copyright licensing more understandable. And then you have the Apache Software Foundation, which is going and helping source code communities come together and be successful, build diverse communities, build successful projects, and do it in a way which is understood that this source code is freely implementable as well. But as I said at the beginning, I'm not the only one thinking about this. I've been working with a lot of other people, and we've been collaborating and talking about these problems and really feeling this pain. And we have very diverse backgrounds coming into this. I want to highlight a few people in terms of really Scott Wheaton and DeWitt Clinton helping to really drive this forward with me, as well as then the expertise and involvement and sort of telling the war stories from people like Gear and Tim and Joey, Sam and Alex and Denise and Dirk, and others who have really lived through some of these similar experiences and are helping us not try to make some of the same mistakes that have been made in the past, largely just because it hadn't been done before. So today, I want to announce the formation of the Open Web Foundation. And what we're really trying to do is create a nonprofit organization where these communities can start to come together, where they can do work together, where it can be done in a fashion that's clearly understood of what does it mean when you go and get a specification from the Open Web Foundation. What does it mean for these communities, these individuals who want to go and get involved and don't have giant companies behind them to either pay dollars to participate or to understand all of the various intellectual property agreements going in. And obviously, we don't want to go and create a new organization. We've been talking with a lot of other organizations. We've said, please do this for us. But so far, we haven't found one that necessarily can. We're not the first foundation. We're not going to be the last foundation. We're going to make some mistakes. But I think we're very much trying to take the open source spirit of going and sort of pulling together a hybrid of other organizations which have come before us, and trying to combine things that have worked, look at things which haven't, and really trying to learn from the people that have done this before. And one of the things that we've seen is that if we don't do this, communities like the OAuth community, the open social community, a community working on an API called Portable Contacts, or a technology called OEmbed, so it becomes easy to go and discover the embed code for YouTube videos or any other site around the web, are going to have to go and create their own organizations over the next year, because that's the only way that they found that they could work. So instead of creating half a dozen nonprofits over the next year, let's try to create one. So focusing on 4 things. One is very much an incubation process. We've modeled a lot of this after the Apache Software Foundation because obviously what they're doing works. So this will be a process which helps communities come together to create new open specifications for the web, which focuses on things like having a diverse community, making sure that you have great reference implementations in open source, dealing with things like licensing, or really the model that we've seen work the past few years is not doing patent licensing, but doing non-assertion agreements, so that specifications that you download are freely implementable. Copyright. Just saying across the board, these specifications will have copyright licenses from Creative Commons, making it simple to understand. And they're trying to build a community which can come together, which can transcend these different projects and support the open web. So we've been focusing a lot on individuals, but also have a great group of companies who see the value in this, who want to really help us drive this forward, and are committed to supporting the Open Web Foundation, both monetarily, but that's not what I want to focus on, more in terms of contributions, in terms of getting involved, in terms of contributing to projects. And I think these companies are invested in keeping the web open. They're invested in this organization. But then it's also the job of this entire community to make sure that all of them remain honest, that they're actually going and supporting the open web, that they really are helping to move things forward. So we were hoping to have the domain openweb.org for you today, but between a California domain acquisition company, a German registrar, and a Swiss owner who wishes to remain anonymous, we have openwebfoundation.org. And the shorter version will be coming a little bit later. We'll be holding a loft this evening, and would be happy to answer questions. Hope that a lot of you come and get involved in helping to keep the web open. Thank you.